two of these questions call for answers that ordinarily take up an important part of our closed classwork. And I'm going to introduce that this afternoon. And tell you that harmony in one's experience depends upon an understanding of it, and that all spiritual healing work is based on it. Without an understanding of it, spiritual healing work is impossible. It is true that some little faith healing is possible without it, and also that some little mental healing is possible without it. But mental healing hasn't been very successful in the history of this country. It began auspiciously, sprouted beautifully, and then died on the vine. There is very little mental healing work going on in this country. And the reason is that the basic principle of truth has been omitted from most teachings. Now let us get back to the question. Is it possible to demonstrate perfection in the case of abscessed teeth? Now let us add to that question. Is it possible to demonstrate perfection in the case of broken bones? Is it possible to demonstrate perfection in the case of insanity? Is it possible to demonstrate perfection in the case of cancer, consumption? And the answer is yes. Yes, in all of these. It is possible. It is not only possible, it's happening every day of the week. But such healings are based primarily on an understanding of the truth of being. Now, there is some healing without it on the part of the few who are spiritually endowed, those who have by nature or who have come into this world with a deep, deep spiritual consciousness. They often do wonderful healing work without knowing anything about the truth of being, without knowing the why or the wherefore of it. They merely have this deep inner spiritual sense, and disease disappears in the presence of their consciousness. There are not too many of these, but here and there you meet them. And then there is some measure of healing work done by those who have studied some of the mental approaches to healing and who, during their study, have developed some spiritual sense. Now, they may be all wrong in their knowledge of the healing principle. They may be far off the beam in their understanding of the truth of being, but somewhere through their study, through their zeal, through their integrity, through their desire, through their love of God, they develop a spiritual sense, and they do some healing work. But actual spiritual healing, which is done through a knowledge of the truth of being, a knowledge which leads to the development of spiritual consciousness, must have an absolute basis in being, and that absolute basis in being must be known and understood. Now, the reason that there is far less healing work going on in the metaphysical world than there was 30 or 40 years ago, and even much less than 50 years ago, much less than 50 years ago, is due to the fact that it seems difficult for the average student to put aside their personal sense of life, their personal problems, their personal human lives, long enough to learn a principle, long enough to study and catch the vision of the principle. It isn't an easy thing to learn this principle while one is concerned with problems, with serious illnesses of their own, and more especially if one insists on catching a glimpse of truth and then running out and trying to heal the world with it. It is far more important that a student do not go out into the world to heal anyone until they have caught the full vision of what they're doing, and then go out and really do the work. So the answer to this is yes. It is possible to heal, to bring out perfection in the case of abscessed teeth, or abscessed bodies, or cancerous bodies, or tumorous bodies, or any other form of discord, if one has the correct understanding of the truth of being, and through that understanding develops the consciousness of it. Now remember, there are two parts to it. I could give you enough in any one afternoon of the knowledge of the truth of being so that you could perform all the miracles that have ever been performed in the history of the world in healing work, if that knowledge were enough. But that knowledge isn't enough. That knowledge has to be carried to the point of realization. And that is where time, effort, and practice come into the picture. I will tell you this afternoon the full and complete truth of being. It will not make healers of you. But if you will take the truth of being, put it into practice in your own affairs, in whatever problems are brought to you, not trying to teach it. No. Don't try to teach it. Don't tell it to anyone, not even your nearest relative or your dearest friend. Keep it to yourself until it has become part of your own being, until by demonstration you know that it's yours. Then you can do all the teaching you want. But if you attempt it before then, you will be trying to teach something you do not know. And both of you will lose. It'll be the blind leading the blind. Now, just to get these out of the way before we come to that, will you explain briefly the metaphysical meaning of the nails piercing the hands of Christ? No, I don't suppose I know that at all. As a part of the physical experience, I guess it was customary to do the crucifying in that manner, and I suppose symbolically it would refer to any of the daggers that people get in their heart when they try, or in their hands or in their feet, when they try to do good for the world. The good that you do is very often evilly spoken of, and sometimes even more harshly treated. May have something to do with that. And will you speak to us of marriage? Very little that I can say on the subject of marriage. Very little. Marriage as an institution was originally created as a protection to the family life, to the integrity of the family life. And like all of human existence in this age, marriage has become primarily a matter of what each one can get out of it. And as long as it remains that way, we will continue to have 70% divorces. Even a human marriage, to be successful, must carry with it some idea of both parties bringing something to it, not both parties seeing what they can get out of it. And that's a long way off in human experience. Spiritually, marriage is the ideal state. From the standpoint of spiritual living, one is not complete, really, until they have found their completeness in God. When an individual finds his completeness in God, they always find that completeness made manifest in the relative world, that is, in the form of a human companion. It is very seldom that a person finds their absolute completeness or union in God without finding a very desirable companion on the outer plane. And that means one who shares their ideas of spiritual living and all that goes with it. And when that occurs, of course, nothing's more ideal than that. I spoke last night about the joy of communion with a person in just sitting in the mountains or valleys or by the rivers and enjoying the beauties there are in this world. So when one has found their inner oneness with God, they must always find that interpreted in the outer realm as a right human companion. Very often that may result in marriage, or sometimes it may just result in a companionship or friendship, or a student and teacher relationship, or practitioner and patient relationship. But there's no reason why it shouldn't result in meeting someone on the level of marriage. And that would be ideal. No one has to be told why marriage is a failure. There isn't anybody in the whole United States of America over the age of 17 who doesn't know why marriage is a failure when it is a failure. And always it is the same reason, that the marriage did not take place because of what one could bring to it. And then this question, why is it that India, which is supposedly so far advanced along this work, is such an impoverished nation? India is not advanced along this work. India is as far in its religious life away from God as the Christian world. And that's about as far as from here to there and back again. The Hindu world is no nearer to spiritual truth than the Christian church. And the Christian church it hasn't even come near the door. Never, never will spiritual church, spiritual truth, abide long in any organized form of religion. There isn't room in an organized form of religion for spiritual truth. And if it does creep in at the beginning, it will find its way out before very long. There are 1,000 reasons for that, and it would take too long to go into it now. But it's been the history of all religion, of every religious teaching in the world. At the moment it was organized, that was the moment when the spiritual nature of it went out, and when materialism crept in. And you can understand that. You can understand that. As soon as an organization is formed, there has to be human rules. And as soon as there are human rules, there is limitation. And there is obedience to the human rules, not an obedience to one's inner spiritual awareness. Supposing right now we were interested in some religious teaching, and like the Master said, go out into this world now and preach it, and take no money, take no purse, no script, and no thought for your life. I wonder how many people we could get who would be willing to start out without purse or script and with no permission to wire home for expenses, and just start out and on their spiritual integrity, on their spiritual awareness, demonstrate their way from place to place. But now you see, there wouldn't be many, and you know it. But that fact alone would destroy any spirituality in the teaching. Because the moment a teacher has to be sent out with a pocket full of money, their dependence is on the money, not on the principle of spiritual supply. And yet the thing that they're trying to teach is that God is supply. And in the same way, if, for instance, well, let us look at each other here. I sit here and voice this truth to you. I do not ask you at what state or stage of sin or disease you are in. I merely present this truth to you, and it is up to you how far you wish to carry it, how far you wish to go with it. And it's your business, not mine. And if you want to go out of here an hour from now and rob a bank, that's your demonstration, not mine. If you want to go out of here and perform any illegal act, that's your business, not mine. I have no responsibility on presenting to you the truth of being. And then it is up to you to take hold of it to as great an extent or small an extent as you wish and come forward. Now, you may be honestly and earnestly seeking God, but at this particular moment, not living up to the spiritual standard of that. And you would start with this truth where you are. You may make lots of mistakes today, tomorrow, next week, next year, but I would not concern myself with that. I would keep giving you the truth of being as I understood it, keep giving you the health and spirit as I understood it, and then let you either instantaneously or gradually be healed of your sins or diseases or lacks or limitations. And in time, those who had a sincere desire for God would make the demonstration of coming in to their spiritual integrity of bodily health as well as financial health and moral health. And I see the moment we would be organized, all that would be ended. I would have to say, now you can't do anything unchristianly, and you'll have to live up to a standard of conduct that I will lay out in the book for you. And in that moment, you begin to suppress and repress, and sometimes be a little hypocritical about it and pretend to a demonstration you haven't made, and then you see we're out of spirituality entirely. We're in the realm of humanly deceiving each other, even deceiving ourselves. And so that's what happens in any organized religious activity. I don't mean organized in the sense of having a place to come to, a center. I mean organized in the sense of a religious institution with rules and regulations of conduct and membership and so forth and so forth and so on. And so you will find that in India, whereas the Buddha had a great light and had a great deal of wisdom and spiritual integrity and was even enabled to pass it on to his disciples and many students and show forth spirituality. After 2 or 3 generations, that was all lost, and a system of religious worship grew up, which was just as material as the religious worship in the churches of today. So for that reason, the people of India have not got an actual spiritual wisdom. Some of the masters, some of the teachers, in some of the ashramas, there is great spiritual wisdom, certainly. But so there is in this country, among some of the priests and rabbis and ministers of the Orthodox churches. So there is in this country among some of the practitioners and teachers in the metaphysical world. That is an individual demonstration, not a national demonstration. So it is. Every country has great religious teaching, and every country has some great religious light. But that is not sufficient to save the country where the people themselves have gone either into superstition, paganism, or materialism. And so, let it be understood clearly that no nation on the face of the earth can claim for itself spirituality merely because there have been some basic, original spiritual teachings in that nation. On the other hand, there is no nation, regardless of how materialistic its religion has been, that has not developed a great spiritual light at some period or other. Today, Japan is going through that experience. There is probably one of the greatest religious lights in the world in Japan today, spreading among the people and coming through a metaphysical interpretation. They have a metaphysical textbook over there, of which over 1 million copies have been sold at $10 a piece, among people who rarely see $10 in a whole year's time. But they have made the sacrifice of buying that book. In the same way, they have no opportunity, or little, to hear a metaphysical lecture. And last year, when they felt very hungry for a metaphysical lecture, they sent over here and deposited $5,000 in the bank to the credit of a metaphysician in order that he would make a trip to Japan and give them a series of lectures, promising him the rest of the money when he was there. That was merely his traveling expenses. You know, there haven't been many $5,000 bills deposited in this country to the credit of any metaphysical teacher inviting them to give lectures. But there has been in Japan, and I'll tell you another thing, that on the first night of his lecture there were 7,000 people present. You see? It's been a long time since there have been 7,000 people in this country to hear a metaphysical lecture. The hunger isn't quite as deep. Probably the need isn't yet quite as deep as it is over in Japan, where they have had a very materialistic form of religion for many, many years, and where the people are hungry for spirit. This textbook, incidentally, is a compilation taken from Science and Health, Lessons in Truth, and many other of the recognized metaphysical writings. And the author and compiler states very frankly his indebtedness to Mrs. Eddy and the Fillmores and all those who have contributed toward the metaphysical enlightenment of the world. And in his book he has combined as much of these teachings as he possibly could. And so you see, it isn't really a question of what church or what original teaching there is. It's a question of what degree of hunger a people have for truth, how far they're willing to go to get it, what they're willing to pay in the way of sacrifice and devotion and study. And then comes the spiritual wisdom to life. India has unfortunately had the caste system where spiritual wisdom has been refused to most people. They also had the misfortune of government by Great Britain, where even ordinary education was refused to most people. So they have all of that to come up out of now, and someone will have to introduce a more spiritual religion into India, and it seems to be taking place through a combination of Eastern and Western teachers and teachings that are now coming together, and out of which is coming something that will benefit the Occident and the Orient. So now we go back to our question: can perfection be brought into manifestation in cases of so-called severe and even incurable diseases? And the answer is yes. And the further answer is that this perfection can be brought about through anyone who achieves an understanding of the truth of being and develops the consciousness, the spiritual awareness of that truth of being. Now, first of all, let it be clearly understood that spiritual healing is not an appeal to a God to help somebody out of their difficulty, nor is it a turning to God to have some help brought about that up to this moment of treatment or prayer is being withheld. It is not an expectancy that God will do something now that he hasn't been doing up to now. So for the moment, let us leave that thought of turning to a God out of the question until we first turn to the truth of being. The basic premise of all spiritual truth is that God is the only life. We might start by saying God is the only being. God is the only being. And you see, that immediately eliminates the possibility of your or my having any being except God being. Now, unless you fix that definitely in your thought, that God is your very being, and that you have no being that was born in 1880, 1890, 1900, 1910. You have no such being. God is. Always remember that all spiritual wisdom begins with the word God, never with you or he or she. All spiritual wisdom begins with the word God. If you do not start your sentence, your paragraph, your page, with the word God, you are not on spiritual wisdom at all. You may be on most anything else in the world, but it definitely isn't spiritual wisdom. Spiritual wisdom must begin with the word God. Then let us go out from there. God is immortal and eternal being. But since God is infinite, God must be all the being there is. And of course leaves you and me without any being, except God being. And so the being of us is God being us. God being is the only us there is. God being is the only being that we have. Of course, is there anyone who believes that God has age, sin, disease, lack, limitation, ignorance, superstition, fear? No. No, God is pure being. God is too pure to behold iniquity. God is immortal being. There's nothing in God that defileth or maketh a lie. But when you say this, you are saying this about your own being. You follow that? You first must know the truth about God. When you know the truth about God, You do not have to know the truth about yourself, because God is your only self. Now do you see where some of the mistake has been made? We have been trying to heal yourself. We have been trying to improve your being. We have been trying to make statements like, you are spiritual, you are perfect, you are harmonious. Bunkum nonsense. Only God is spiritual, and God is perfect, and God is harmonious, and because God is that, and because God is the only being, there is no other condition anywhere. God is the only mind. Have you even intellectually agreed on that in your studies? What do you think about insanity now? Can't be. Can it? There can only be insanity if we come down now and think about your mind and my mind. Huh? But supposing we understand that God is your mind and my mind, and his mind and her mind, then how do we treat insanity? We don't, do we? No. You can't treat insanity. All you can do is stay up here on the level of realization that God is the only mind, and ignore these appearances. Ignore them. Don't come down and try to heal them and improve them and change them. Ignore them. Stay up here. God is the only mind. If God is the only mind, God is infinite mind. Have we got a mind? Yeah, we have, but it's God, isn't it? It's God mind. We have no mind of our own. We have no mind apart from God. Of course we have a mind, but it's God. God is our mind. Is there anything that defile us or make us alive in the mind of God? No. If it isn't in the mind of God, it can't be in the mind of you or me, since God is the mind of you or me. And haven't we made the mistake of trying to heal somebody's mind and telling them how they should be better and how they should be more spiritual and more truthful and more loving? Yes, we've made that mistake. Nobody can be more spiritual. Nobody can be more loving. Nobody can be more intelligent. God is the mind of individual being, and you must keep your treatment up on that level. God is the only life. How old am I? There you have it. Why do we show signs of age, infirmity, weakness? We have accepted the universal belief in calendars and birthdays. Now, I don't say to give up having birthday parties. They're a lot of fun. But don't believe that they represent your age. Have them at least just for an anniversary of pleasure and exchanging of gifts, but don't connect them with your age. Just like we can make Christmas every day in the week, and Thanksgiving every day in the week. Let's have a birthday every day in the week, too. But don't associate a birthday with the extremes of your life, birth and death. If God is life, then life is eternal. But if God is life, then God being infinite, life is infinite. And so there can't be but one life. That life must be your life, and it must be my life, and it must be an eternal life and an immortal life and a changeless life. Yes, there can't be a change of life. Life is just God unfolding day by day, always appearing progressively in greater measure, greater integrity, greater vitality. But it's always God's life, and it's never your life or my life. And all this business about saying that you are immortal or you are spiritual, or that's all ruled out in this work. There's no you to this. God gets the treatment, not you. And the treatment we give God is the realization of God as the one immortal and eternal life, but God as individual life, the life of you and of me, into which nothing enters that defile us or make us alive. Oh, we can go all the way down. Activity. Can the organs or functions of your body be active? No. Can they be inactive? No. Why? because they can't have any activity. God has all the activity there is. God is infinite activity, infinite harmonious activity. So we're not concerned with your activity or mine, since God's activity is the activity of your body and of mine, and we have no activity of our own. We have no inactivity of our own. We have no underactivity, we have no overactivity, because we have no activity, period. There is one activity, and that is God activity. And God activity is the activity of our being and of our body and of our business. Well, we have problems of supply, too. And that is only because we have a claim of having supply or not having supply. If God is infinite, can we have supply apart from God's supply? No. How can we have supply of our own if God has all the supply there is? Therefore, it is literally true that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And Son, all that I have is that. So you see, there's no question of having supply, and there's no question of not having supply. It's a question of the truth of being, that all supply belongs to God, but since God is our being, all supply is incorporated in our being and is ever with us. Whether or not we are aware of it at this moment isn't the point. We are dealing now with the truth of being. And the truth of being is that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The Son, all that I have is thine. Well, in this question was the idea of thought of abscess P. Abscess. Again, that involves a substance, doesn't it? But if God is infinite, is there any substance but God's substance? And so God being the substance of all that is there anything that enters the substance of God that defileth or maketh alive? No. So the whole thing up to this point is rising in our own thought above the belief that we have a life, we have a mind, we have a soul, we have a spirit, or we have supply, or we have a body, when the truth of being reveals that God is infinite. God being infinite and immortal and eternal, all there is God, and God being universal being must be individual being. And that's the only being of you, the only being, the all-inclusive, perfect, harmonious, and whole. Now, when we have gone along that with everything that we can think of that relates to the truth of being from the standpoint of God and its creation, and incidentally, one of the most helpful things in gaining this consciousness is the first chapter of Genesis. If there were nothing in print but the first chapter of Genesis, we could all make our supreme and complete demonstration. There is enough in the first chapter of Genesis to include all the scriptures and all the world. Why? Because it reveals God as the creative principle of all that is, and as the substance of all that is, and as the activity of all that is. That's pretty really enough to know. Now we go a step further in this truth of being, because we are faced with appearances to the contrary of this truth of being. It's strange, but it's true, that while this is the truth of being, that is, God's allness, God as the life, substance, and being, God as the only law and the only activity of being. And that's another thing to take up too, God as the only law, because in realizing God as the only law, you annihilate laws of matter, infection, contagion, calendars, time, space, food, and all of these things that come under so-called material law. Because once you've understood God as the only law and the only lawgiver, you no longer have to deal with any material law, nor would they have power over it. They would, in a measure, lose their power. Now then, in spite of the fact that God is love, and God is life, and God is wisdom, and God is our individual being, the fact remains that we still present evidences, appearances of sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation. And as long as there is an appearance of sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, as long as these erroneous, finite appearances exist, it is necessary that we discover the nature of those appearances in order to drop them from our experience. That is where the infinite way takes a step that at this time is taken in no other metaphysical teaching today. And it accounts for the fact that in a few brief years the infinite way has gone as far around the world as it can go in space, as far as it can go, because it can't get behind the Iron Curtain and it can't get very far in Roman Catholic countries. But it has touched every land on the earth, and its spread is at a rate that no one of us today can keep pace with, because if I were to tell you how much it is today, tomorrow, that would no longer be true. In a few brief months, a very large edition of the Infinite Way has had to go into its second edition in the British Empire. And it is going throughout that empire rapidly. And even the tape recordings have reached to Australia and New Zealand and Tasmania and South Africa, North Africa, England, throughout this United States and Canada. But let me tell you that this is taking place because of the healings that are taking place through those who are practicing healing in the message of the Infinite Way, and their success is due to this point that we are coming to now, partly in point to the first part that I just mentioned, because our practitioners and teachers are taught to stand rigidly on that truth of God as individual being, God as the only being. Soon you will have the opportunity here of hearing the Honolulu closed class. I believe Mrs. Clow already has it, hasn't she? Yes, she already has it. And I'm sure she's not going to keep it locked up too long. And you will notice in that Honolulu closed class that the major theme of it is God as individual being. God as your being and my being. God as the only being. And therefore, the innate perfection, harmony, completeness of God's being individually appearing as yours and mine. But now, from there, we go to the second step. And here, I have to tell you that in the handling of disease, in the treatment of disease, in our way, we do not concern ourselves with the name or nature of the disease. In other words, it is no concern of ours whether it's cancer or consumption, a simple pimple, a simple cold, or a little indigestion, or a simple headache. One is no more important than another. One is no more difficult to heal than another, except that one sometimes takes a little longer because of its tenacity in human thought. In other words, the human mind today has such a horror of the word cancer that sometimes those who come under that claim have that dread and hold on to it longer than they would hold on to a simple cold, merely because of the nature of the fear involved. But actually, so far as the disease itself is concerned, it is no more difficult to meet a cancer than it would be to meet a pimple. It would be no more difficult to meet consumption than it would be to meet a common cold. And the reason for the fact that many of these take longer to heal than others is only the tenacity of the hold of fear that has been impregnated in the human thought. From the healing standpoint, there is no difference. And if you were treating disease, if you were acting as practitioner with somebody, you must, according to the infinite way method, learn to ignore the name or nature of the claim and handle it in this wise. Having admitted that God is infinite and eternal being, all being, and that God is spirit and that God is law, is there a disease or a law of disease? Is there a substance of disease? Is there a form to disease? Is there a continuity to disease? No, there couldn't be. There couldn't be and a God of infinite good. Could there be a God who is love and any reality to a disease? No. Now then, that relegates disease to the realm of appearance, or claim, or belief, or suggestion, doesn't it? It doesn't leave it now as an externalized thing in the body or on the body, does it? No. Now, if you have God as infinite, eternal good, and you want a disease, the only way you can have it is as an illusory appearance, as a suggestion, a temptation, an image, a mirage, an illusion, but never, never as something in or on the body. Is that clear? A disease is never in or on the body. Now we will exemplify that with the illustration of the desert. You have traveled on the desert and probably have come to a place where you notice water on the road ahead of you, and probably slowed down a while so as not to skid. And then notice that that water was always just about 30 feet ahead of you. You never did catch up to it. And that brought to your mind the fact, why, it isn't water, it's a mirage. Then you went ahead in your automobile and paid no further attention to the mirage. Now, while it was water, the natural, logical thing would be to want to get it off the road, probably siphon it off if you couldn't get it off any other way. But once you saw it as a mirage, you no longer had the desire to get rid of it, did you? Because as a mirage, it was no power, no danger, no wetness. Or you may have seen on that same desert a great big city ahead of you, and then found later you had to drive right through that city. Because the city wasn't there as an externalized form. That city was only there as a mirage. And where is a mirage? Out here or up here? It's in one's misperception, isn't it? And you have seen the sky sitting on the mountains in the distance, haven't you? Is that an externalized thing, or is that up in your own mind? Yes, that's up here. You're looking out and not beholding it as it is. In other words, then, the horizon is not an externalized condition, is it? And water on the road isn't an externalized condition. And the city in the desert isn't an externalized condition. And they have no substance, have they? No law, no continuity. They exist only as a nothingness mirage. A mirage without a form, without a law, without a body, without a being. And because you've recognized them as mirage, you disappear. Now, in one instance, the mirage appears as water on the road. The next instance, the mirage appears as an ocean out there. And the third instance, the mirage appears as a city out there on the desert. And the next, the mirage appears as a horizon, the sky sitting on the water or the sky sitting on the mountain. And again, the mirage appears as railroad tracks coming together in the distance. They never do come together, do they, out there? From the standpoint of the infinite way, God being infinite good, God being love, be assured of this, there is no sin or disease. And so whatever it is that appears to us as sin or disease can only exist as a mirage, an illusion, a false sense of what actually is there, an appearance, a false appearance, a temptation to believe in a selfhood apart from God. And so, any form of disease exists only in an illusory sense, without substance, law, cause, or effect. Now, what difference whether the mirage appears one instant as a cold and the next minute as a cancer? If it is the same illusory nothingness, mirage. Now, you will find that you can do beautiful healing work if you will not take into your thought one patient with a broken bone and the other one with paralysis and the other with blindness and the other with deafness and the other with lumbago, and stick to your premise of God as individual being, and that all forms of discord exist only in the sense of a mirage, trying to fool us into accepting it as a reality. Now, we're told by the Master, judge not after appearances, judge righteous judgment. Even with sinners, we're told, who did sin? I don't accuse you. Where are thine accusers? In other words, he never accepted it as a real condition. Nor did he accept disease as a real condition. What did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk. Rise, walk. Watch the miracle of healing that takes place when you once agree that you're not concerned with the particular form, abscess teeth, broken bones, insanity. Don't go into that. Don't go back and become materia medica. Don't go back and try to be doctors healing diseases, finding mental causes for physical diseases. That all belongs in the realm of materia medica. And I don't say that materia medica shouldn't heal disease. And I don't say that mental science shouldn't find a mental cause for physical disease, because they are operating on that level of consciousness where that is where they produce their results, whatever it may be. But that has nothing to do with the truth of being. The truth of being has to do with God and its creation. The truth of being has to do with God and its formation, God and its laws, and our ability to see through appearances to God and its creation. Now, that is why I say that in this resume are the two basic principles of infinite way healing. You have enough truth to heal your whole world. But I also say to you that it won't do that except in proportion as you live with it, treat with it, work with it, until it translates itself from an intellectual agreement to some state of inner awareness. When that moment comes, then you will find that healing is the normal, natural thing, and it takes place very often without your even giving a conscious treatment, without you even knowing that somebody was sick and required. But there are those two things. The need to know God as individual being, and stop trying to pick out people here and reform them or heal them or change them or correct them or get them to be better than they are. Leave them alone. Go to God and realize the truth about God and God as individual being, and then all harmony will follow. And watch the second step. When you are faced with automobile accidents and fires and earthquakes and volcanoes, only you will remember that those are merely the pictures superimposed upon this mirage stuff, and that the substance of them is mirage. And don't get frightened at them, and don't try to think of a prayer to remove them or heal them, but look through them and realize, oh no, back of all this is God, and all of this appearance stuff, this is the mirage that would fool us into believing that there is a creation apart from God, that there is a law apart from God, a law of sin, a law of disease, law of poverty, law of lack. There are no such laws. There's only one law. God is the only law, and God is the only lawgiver, and so there are no laws of limitation, not physical, mental, moral, or financial. There are no laws of limitation, and when you hit up against one, it becomes necessary for you Not to be concerned with the form, whether it's water on the road or a city on the desert, but go behind and say, no, no, no. Regardless of the appearance, that's only mirage. Then you'll find how quickly you will heal. You'll find how quickly the evidences of discord fade out of your experience. Don't turn to God and think of God as healing. Just look out and face the situation with the truth. I don't care what form the appearance is in. Behind it is the mirage which forms pictures of nothingness. Pictures without substance, law, cause, or effect. I told you in 1 hour to learn it all. Just take a little longer, though, to practice it and bring it into expression. Thank you.